language of change, if used correctly, it would greatly affect your lexical resource. It is important to take note that in writing a report in IELTS writing task 1, deciding if the graph that you're going to describe is a progression, comparison, or combination of both should be taken into account. You should also remember that whenever you're going to describe this type of graphs, language of change should be taken into account as well. Well, hi there, my name is Teacher Edmore, and for today's lesson, we are going to discuss on what type of language of change should be used in a progression type of graph. Now, maybe some of you are asking, what does it mean if we say progression type of a graph? Well, basically, examples of this one are line graph and bar graph. And it's very important that we should look if there are time frame. Well, if there are time frame, then that's the time that we are going to use language of change. Well, basically, they have beginnings and they have endings. Another question would be, what are language of change? Well, basically, these are verbs that would describe some modifications or even some changes. And you might be surprised to see that these words like peak, increase, decline, rise, and finish at are really common. But not just using them raw, but it's also important that we should add some vocabularies to come up with phrases and even collocations so that it would make our lexical resource even better. It's also important that we should group our data. Well, presenting our data with language of change would not be enough. So we have to group our data to show some similarities and also to compare, to show some contrast there. Now, let's start with our first example. As you can see, the graph below shows the sales of CDs in thousands in a music shop between 1980 and 2002. So how did they use language of change here? In the beginning of the period, there were less than 68,000 sales made, and this had a little increase until 1984. The figures dropped about 47,000 in 1986, then it reached a peak to below 90,000 after 2 years. So as you can see, language of change are used here. Now, maybe some of you are actually confused, like, okay, how am I going to use language of change with a proper structure? Well, we could just come up with a simple pattern that maybe some of you could follow. We could use connectors or cohesive devices. So that would be CO for connectors, plus our change, CH, plus the value, and plus the time. So if we would look at our first line here, in the beginning, that is our connector or our cohesive device. We also have here our change, language of change, less than the value itself, that's 68,000, and the time, which is 1984. Let's have another example here. Like what I've mentioned, presenting language of change would not be enough, so it's important that we should group our data as well. The line graph below shows changes in the amount and type of fast food consumed by Australian teenagers from 1975 to 2000. Now, let's see how they wrote their overview here. Overall, the consumption of fish and chips declined over the period. So this one is our language of change. Whereas the amount of pizza and hamburgers, well, pizza and hamburgers, if we're going to look at our graph here, hamburgers and pizza, they had the same trend together. So we could just combine it by using our conjunction and that were eaten increased. So it's important that we should group our data whenever they are similar. Now, let's take a look at our final example here. We are going to use the same graph, but what we want to see here is how comparison was made and how it was incorporated with language of change. In 1975, the most popular fast food with Australian teenagers was fish and chips, being eaten 100 times a year. This was far higher than pizza and hamburgers, which were consumed approximately 5 times a year. As you can see here, we have the most popular and far higher than. These are what we call language of comparison. Well, we could use comparative adjectives at the same time, superlative adjectives to show some comparisons. And we could also use some connectors to show a comparison, like however. So, however, apart from a brief rise again from 1980 to 1985, the consumption of fish and chips gradually declined over the 25-year time scale to finish at just under 40. So instead of using language of comparative like superlative and comparative, we could use language of change, at the same time some connectors. In IELTS writing task 1, you must do comparisons well. You have to compare all the given data to show their relationship. It's not enough that you would just present what happened to pizza, fish and chips, and even hamburgers. So why is it that language of change is important? And well, like what I've mentioned a while back, language of change, if used correctly, it would greatly affect your lexical resource. Not only that, we have to group our data according to their similarities to show a logical presentation and for our report to follow easily and read. And finally, let's compare our data because, well, we have to adhere to what is being asked in our rubric, right? So if you're going to follow our magic formula, it's possible that we could get a band score of 7 in our coherence and cohesion as well as lexical resource. Well, that's it for today. I hope that you learned something, and please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget as well to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. See you next time. Ciao.